Today we're going to be talking about the time frame from medieval to Gothic. We're going to start off with Sutton Hoo. So Sutton Hoo is a group of low grassy burial mounds overlooking Woodbridge and the River Deben in the southeast Suffolk part of England. In 1939, excavations brought to light the richest burial ever discovered in Britain, an Anglo-Saxon ship containing the treasure of one of the earliest English kings, Raedwald, King of East Anglia. Further excavations completed in 1992 proved the site to be a complex collection of burials, some royal, others possibly the victims of a judicial execution. Let's start off with this helmet. On July 28th, Friday, of 1939, the crushed remains of an iron helmet were found 4 feet east of a shield on the north side of the central deposit of the hill. The remains consisted of many fragments of iron covered with embossed ornaments of an interlaced type with which were also associated gold leaf, textiles, an anthropomorphic face piece consisting of a nose, mouth, and mustache, cast as a whole bronze, and bronze zoomorphic mountings and enrichments. And here we can see, the what they found of that original helmet. At the center of the chamber was presumably the body, though as the soil was so acidic, it had not survived. Around the body, though, were many personal treasures. Above is the great purse lid with elaborate gold decorations on the outside. So that would have probably had a fabric or leather kind of satchel, and then you can see the hinges there made in gold, and then the rest is like enameled, and it's really quite beautiful. The purse was probably attached to a wide leather belt by 3 hinges at the top and fastened by the sliding catch at the bottom. The purse contained 37 gold coins dated to about 625 after Christ. One of the buckles that fastened the king's belt was made of gold and inlaid with red garnets. So this is a map of just about where Sutton Hoo would be located. And here we see a brooch that was also made during this time around the 6th century. And then here's the animal head of a ship. Now this one is from 825 from Oostburg. The ship's a ship burial, and it's located in the Oslo Museum. And you can really see the knotwork like in the head of the serpent. Another thing that's happening during this time is, as we talked about in the early Christian church, is the conversion of the barbar or the barbarians. And one of the things that was needed during this time were the manuscripts of the Bible. And so because it was before the invention of mechanical writing, books had to be handmade, and they were objects of treasure. They were considered works of art, and they were symbols of the enduring knowledge of Christianity. Indeed, in the Middle Ages, the book becomes an attribute to God. Every stage in the creation of the medieval book required intensive labor, sometimes involving the collection of entire workshops to collaborate. Parchment for the pages had to be made from the dried hides of animals, and then it was cut down to size and sewn into quires. Inks had to be mixed, pens had to be made and prepared, and the pages had to be ruled for lettering. This is a book cover from the Byzantine icon of the Crucifixion. The icon was carved about the year 1000 in Constantinople. Settings were made probably prior to that. It's got a gilded silver on wood backing for the cover. The icon is made of ivory, the carving, and then there's also inlays of sapphire, glass, and crystal. This is a page from the manuscript of Otto III. It's Christ washing the feet of his disciples. And you can see here a kind of style that's very interesting. So if we look at all the faces, they almost look like the same face. So there's not really necessarily a canon, but it's just a very simplified way of creating the faces. And it's not necessarily a medieval style, but it's definitely much more archaic than what we saw in ancient Greece with the sculptures and some of the paintings and even the mosaics that we see in Rome. So it's a very flat, we don't really see any type of perspective or real true modeling. Everything kind of looks the same. We do have a halo. Here's another page from a manuscript. This is a scribe copied from the text of the established edition. Here's another page. Many bookmakers in the Middle Ages were monks, and monasteries kept libraries and filled not only with sacred texts, but also literary, scientific, and philosophical works by Greek and Roman authors. Multi-volume Bibles and huge liturgical books were housed and used in churches. Princes, emperors commissioned a gospel book with many colored illustrations. And at this time, these books were not like the whole Bible in one. They were separate little books of different gospels. This is a cover of a Bible, a single volume Bible. At this time, there was the emergence of universities. And they created demands for these single volume Bibles. They also had a demand for books of law and other texts copied on pages with wide margins for notes and commentary. In the 13th century and 14th centuries, private persons bought and used books of hours which contained prayers to be recited throughout the day. This is a book cover plaque from, it's called Christ in Majesty, and it's from about 1185. It was made in France. And it was made in Limoges, and it's a gilded copper and enamel. The Book of Kells was written about 800 after Christ and is one of the most beautifully illuminated manuscripts in the world. It contains the 4 Gospels preceded by prefaces, summaries, and canon tables or concordances of Gospel passages. It is written on vellum and contains a Latin text of the Gospels, an insular majuscule, a script accompanied by magnificent and intricate whole pages of decoration, with smaller painted decorations appearing throughout the text. Now, there are several copies that have been made about of the Book of Kells, replicas, if you will, and there is one at the rare books area of the Marquette University. So that would definitely be something if you want to go and take a look at, to be able to see. And if you go there and tell them, you know, you're a Concordia student and you'd like to see the replica of the Book of Kells, they'll give you some white gloves, hopefully, and open it up for you. So here we have insular majuscule. So majuscule literally is like large, right? So like a capital letters, if you will. But notice how the letters kind of pull into each other. See the decoration on some of the letters. Here's a page of full illumination. Again, remember that kind of serpentine, kind of like knotwork that we saw in the animal head just a minute ago. We start to see that brought into the Christian illustration of these manuscripts. And if we look to the right here, we can see sort of like the Irish knotwork. So the Book of Kells obviously made in Ireland. Here is another close-up of one of the illustrations. So the scribes would leave spaces for the illustrations, and then the artists that would do the illustrations would come in and do them afterwards. Here's another from the Book of Kells. And there we can see, again, a very different style of portraying Christ. And there's that serpentine knotwork that I was talking about, and with a totally different purpose. So at one time it would have been more of a rustic religion, and now we can see that it's definitely changed over and is now, you know, same kind of style, but with a Christian content. And I'll just sort of go through some of these. Really quite beautiful. All of this was hand done. So that takes us over to the Carolingian period. The Carolingian period lasted from about 754 to about 950 AD, following 3 centuries of political turmoil, which resulted in the decline of artistic output. The artistic styles of the late antiquity were nowhere to be found in Western Europe. King Pepin III, who started the process of cultural reform by appointing architects to imitate Roman churches, he was the one to start to bring Christian culture from Italy to the Frankish Empire. His son Charlemagne, also Carolus Magnus, ruled from 768 to 814, continued to work towards the same goals in architecture and expanded the Renaissance to literature. An influx of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon monks had brought Christian literature to the mainland in Europe because of the scribes and the monasteries that were recreating the Bible and other works. Charlemagne wanted artists to emulate the naturalist style of early Christian art. So this is his chapel at Aachen. The Palatine Chapel was located at the other side of his palace complex in Aachen to the south. A stone gallery linked it to the Aula Regalia. It symbolized another aspect of Charlemagne's power and religious power. Legend has it that the building was consecrated in 805 by Pope Louis III in honor of the Virgin Mary, Mother of Christ. Several buildings used by the clerics of the chapel were arranged in the shape of a Latin cross, a curia in the east, offices in the north and south, and a project part and an atrium with exedre into the west. But the centerpiece was the chapel, covered with 16.54 meters wide and 31 meters high. It was sort of an octagonal cupola. 8 massive pillars received the thrust of the large arcades. The nave on the first floor is located under the cupola, is surrounded by an aisle which stood where the palace servants would stand during services. The 2 additional floors opened up to the central space through a semicircular arches that were supported by columns. The inner side takes the shape of an octagon, whereas the outer side develops into a 16-sided polygon. The chapel had 2 choirs located to the east and the west, and the king sat on the throne made of white marble plates. And on the second floor, there were closed courtier areas. Thus, he had a view from the 3 altars, that of the Savior right in front of him, that of the Virgin Mary on the first floor, and that of St. Peter at the far end of the western choir. So here's an interior view of the chapel, and there you can see the way that you could look up to all the 3 floors, the stained glass and so forth. This is St. Gall. 2 distinguished guests of the abbey were Peter and Romanus, cantors from Rome, sent by Pope Adrian I at Charlemagne's request to propagate the use of Gregorian chants. Peter went to Metz, where he established an important chant school, but Romanus had fallen sick at St. Gall, and he stayed there with Charlemagne's consent. The decrees, so you can see how big this complex is. The decrees of the Council of Aachen for the furtherance of discipline and the religious spirit were loyally carried out into effect by Abbot Gottsbert, under whom the monks built a new and magnificent church, and by whom also the library was greatly enlarged. He purchased many fresh manuscripts and set his monks to copy them. His successor Grimoald carried on the work, and a catalogue drawn up in his time still extant shows the wide range of subjects represented. Over 400 of the manuscripts mentioned in the catalogue are still there at St. Gall. This is the Church of San Clemente from 1123. Saint Clement Tital also known as the Church of St. Clement of Tajoux, is a Roman Catholic church in Catalonia, Spain. It is an example of Romanesque architecture. Other influences included the Lombard and Byzantine styles, which can be seen throughout. Connecting to the church is a slim bell tower that has 6 floors plus a base. The artwork inside the church includes the famous murals painted by the Master of Tajoux, as well as the wooden altar frontal. These works of art represent different aspects of Christianity. They also can be found in other works of art. The most famous fresco of Christ in Majesty in the main apse of the church has been moved to the National Museum in Barcelona. So if we're going to look at medieval to Gothic architecture, we really need to look at the abbey churches. So this is the Abbey Church of Saint Foy in Conques-Roques, France. The Abbey Church of Saint Foy was a popular spot for pilgrims. So when people would be converted to Christianity, they wanted to, they would come to the church for many reasons. Many times they would be sick, or they would want to have answers. Think of it the way they came back in the ancient times to the Oracle of Delphi. They would go to the church to pray, to have understanding. And so a popular stop on the way of St. James to Santiago in what is now Spain was to go to the Abbey Church of Saint Foy. The main draw for the medieval pilgrims were the remains of Saint Foy, a young woman who was martyred during the 4th century. The relics of Saint Foy arrived in the church through theft in 866, after unsuccessful attempts to acquire the relics of Saint Vincent of Saragossa, and then the relics of Saint Vincent Pompeijac in Agen. The abbey authorities set their sights on the relics of Saint Foy at the ancient Saint Faith Church of Sélestat. The Conques Abbey opened up a priory next to the shrine. A monk from the Conques posed as a loyal monk in Agen for nearly a decade in order to get close enough to the relics to steal them. He then stole them and brought them to the Abbey Church of Saint Foy. The Abbey Church is listed as a monument since 1840. So let's take a look at the inside. So here we can see this basilican style. We can see the external areas where the windows are. We also see the X's where we would have the groin vaults. And then we see there's a large kind of groin vault area in the center. And then the large apse with little radiating smaller apses around them. So let's look at the inside of that. So this is what that would look like. Look at how tall they are and how high they go up. So hopefully you take time to watch the video on medieval churches, the PBS video that I have in the YouTube section of this course. This is a reliquary statue in the Abbey Church of Saint Foy, and so those we see quite a bit. This would be a statue where the relic would be placed inside, or there might be a box, but it's bejeweled and it's gilded with gold, and quite special to show the importance of the saint. So the idea here was that you would come and you would get close to the relic, or the relics might be paraded, and you would give alms or offerings, and you would be able to enjoy the grace of the saint. This is the Abbey Church of Saint Seven. Here's the interior, and we can see it's one large barrel vault with a coffered ceiling, and there we can see the light coming in from the clerestory on the sides of the columns, and the columns now are straight, plain. We start to see a lot of different kinds of decoration. But look at the size. So at the bottom there we have all the chairs. So this would be like the Colosseum. I mean, it's large open area. This is the Abbey Church of Saint-Lazare, Autun, in Burgundy, France, and it was built around 1120. And there we can see the apse in the front end of the church. Notice that the top of the church looks like a cross. In the center of where the cross would be, or the transept, that was where the bell tower is, and underneath that would be where the altar would be. There's also sometimes small altars in those little radiating apses around the large apse. And then, of course, at the front of the building is the atrium and so forth. So what we see here are the portals. So we really start to decorate the doorways, and we have gone from just an arch for a doorway to these highly decorated sculptural arches. So kind of like the way we thought of ancient Greece and Rome, where we had the bas-reliefs around the frieze and the metapiece and the triglyphs and so on. Now we have gone full on, and we're doing these large sculptures that tell the stories of the Bible on the doorway. So before you even get inside the church, you're starting to see, the stories. So we have the door, we have the jambs around the outside. So remember when we looked at the original arches that there was like a jamb column. We have jamb figures. We have a lintel that goes across. Instead of a pediment, we have a tympanum, so it's a rounded area. And then we have the arc volts, and then the spandrel that goes across the top of the whole thing. And then that's Romanesque. By the time we get to Gothic, it's almost like as if we took and pinched it and pulled it straight up. So what we see in the Gothic are much taller, much thinner, much more elegant, more refined stone sculptures. So let's take a look at a real one. So here we are at the portal, the west portal of the Church of San Lazare. Let's look at a close-up. So here's some of the sculptures that are happening, and this is 1120. And so here we're talking about what would happen if you don't follow your faith, if you end up in hell, and sort of the terribleness that will befall you, and there you can see these kind of monsters and all of this stuff happening. So pretty terrible stuff. Here's the west portal. This is also from San Lazare, and there we see, the veneration of the dead, and usually the king. Another very important piece of art during this time frame was the Bayeux tapestry. So the Bayeux tapestry is a Norman Anglo-Saxon embroidery that was from Canterbury and Kent in England, and also Bayeux, Normandy in France. So this took many years to create, and it symbolizes the different wars and things that had happened during this time frame. 1066, William the Conqueror mostly. And there we can see kind of a close-up of this embroidery. Again, it's anonymous. Most likely it was done by women. It's extremely long, beautiful tapestry. This is the Church of Saint Etienne in Caen, Normandy, France. It was begun in 1064. In the 11th century. The spires were built in the 13th century. It took quite a while to build. And this is still kind of in a like in between a Romanesque. So we see all the arches, not the pointed Gothic, but then we have the pointed spires. So it's kind of an in-between sort of look. So let's go to Chartres. So Chartres, France. It's situated on the Eure River, east of Paris, in the rich agricultural region of the Bayeux. Chartres is a charming town with narrow cobbled streets, winding among quaint little houses and on the river. What sets the town apart from dozens of similarly beautiful little towns in France, however, is its cathedral. It is called the Notre Dame de Chartres, or Our Lady of Chartres. Authorities maintain that the site of Chartres has been sacred since the Druid times. There has likely been a church here since the evangelization of the Chartres in the 4th century by Saint Adventinus. The church at St. Chartres has been dedicated to Mary since the 8th century, making it one of the first in France to be so dedicated. In 858, after the church had been pillaged and burnt by the Vikings, Charles the Bald, Charlemagne's grandson presented the church with what was known as the Sancta Comisia, the veil believed to have been worn by the Blessed Mother Mary when she gave birth to Jesus. Other sources say that the veil was part of the Annunciation. In any event, they've carbon dated the Sancta Comisia, and it is several thousand, 2,000 years old. So is it the real veil? Well, we don't know for sure. But the increasing importance during this time given to Mary in the 12th and the 13th century, there was an idea of chivalry and so forth, was a belief that the relics provided a tangible link to the saints. And that made Chartres an increasingly important place of pilgrimage because it had the Sancta Comisia. These beliefs were confirmed in the minds of the inhabitants of Chartres in 911 when a Viking chieftain by the name of Rollo besieged the town. The bishop ordered the relic to be paraded in the city walls, and the besiegers fled. The School of Chartres was one of a series in northern France which dominated medieval intellectual life until eclipsed by the University of Paris toward 1200, such as those of Reims and Lyon. Fulbert was the bishop of Chartres until his death in 1028, and it was during his reign that the cathedral was once again destroyed, this time by fire, on September 7th of 1020. Fulbert solicited funds from all over Europe to rebuild a more magnificent replacement in Romanesque style. During the night of June 10th, 1194, most of the city of Chartres destroyed by fire, and Fulbert's cathedral was badly damaged. It is believed that all had been lost. Most significantly was the loss of the Sancta Comisia. But then, 3 days later, 3 smoky and hungry priests emerged from the crypt, where they had taken refuge along with the relic. This was taken by all of the people of Chartres as a miracle and a sign from the Virgin to build an even grander cathedral. So here we have a kind of a look at how the cathedral was built. So you definitely can see the buttresses, the rose window, the portals, the 2 different spires because they were built at different times, the choir area, the crossing or transept where, the cross, scaffolding, rib vaulting. So that was that pulling up of the vaults, instead of having the groin vault, it was a rib vault. So it was pulled up and it had many ribs in it. So let's take a look at the overhead. Here we can see all of the crossings of the vaults, the X's, the porches on both sides, the narthex and the front end, the choir area, the transept, the apse, and the radiating chapels, or what were called ambulatories. So you could walk through them, and there would be different altars to different saints. So this is the nave. It's really quite large. Here's the triforium where the stained glass would come down, so there'd be like sections of 3. The crypts, so it's, underground burial. Here's some of the apses and the buttresses. Some of these buttresses weigh thousands of tons. Here's the west facade and some of the portals. And the stained glass, there's over 110 windows, some just incredible. A lot of the stained glass in Chartres is blue, and they actually call it Chartres blue. They haven't been able to come up with the exact replica of how they made the color. So let's take a look at the vaulting system. So remember we had the groin vault. And now we started to pull it up to kind of a pointed arch. And then we have a complex groin rib vault, which is multiples. So, and then a quadripartite rib vault. So these are all the different angles of, trying to pull it all up. So now it's no longer arch like in the way that we remember the rounded arch because we don't have a keystone. The 2 vault areas like fold in on each other, and the weight is there. Oh, I want to go back. This is the Abbey Church of Saint Denis. So the Abbey Church of Saint Denis, a very important church. The Abbot Suger was very instrumental in reading the Bible and thinking about God as light and the form of light. And so we wanted to bring more light into the church, and this is where we really see, because we can't make big sheets of glass yet. We don't have the technology. So what we're doing is we are putting together small pieces of glass in tracery. So sometimes it's stone, sometimes it's metal, and that was how we invented the stained glass. So here we can see the apse, or the radiating chapels, the apsidal chapels, and the main apse, and then the choir. Here's a look at that. So you can just see how beautiful. You can move in the little altars that are in each little rounded area and kind of walk through. Here's another look. And there you can see the rib vaults and how they're pulled up, right? And into these, and connected. And then this is the Abbey Church of Saint-Denis, Ile-de-France, and the Virgin and Child. Again, another reliquary piece. Now let's go to Notre Dame. So construction began in 1163 during the reign of Louis the 12th. Louis the 7th. To the resources of the church, and royal gifts were added, and the toil and skill of common people, stonemasons, carpenters, ironsmiths, sculptors, glaziers. They all moved with religious fervor and worked with ardor under Jean of Chelles and Pierre Montreal, the architects of Sainte-Chapelle. By about 1345, the building was complete. The original plans had not been modified in any way. The walls and the interior vaulted ceilings are of stone. Its roof and spires were of wood, much of it 13th century oak, sheathed in lead to exclude water. The spire was built several times, most recently in the 19th century. Notre Dame de Paris is more than 700 years old and is the most recent of holy houses to occupy this sacred ground. The Celts had held their services on this island in the Seine, and atop their sacred groves, the Romans built their own temple to Jupiter. In the early years of Christianity, a basilica dedicated to Saint Etienne was constructed around 528 by Childebert. So here's the nave, and then eventually we get to the Notre Dame. So here's the nave of Notre Dame. The church is in Romanesque manner, replaced the basilica that was there for Saint Etienne, and this stood until 1163 when work began to see the structure that we have today. Although, we do know that in the last 5 years that we did have this great fire. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But for 2,000 years, prayers had been offered from that spot. It was a Gallo-Roman temple, a Christian basilica, a Romanesque church, preceded by the present church. The church was built in Paris, France, and really quite beautiful. One of the interesting parts of Notre Dame are the gargoyles. The gargoyles adorn the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, are among the most enchanting and recognizable features of the church. These mysterious creatures, often portrayed as grotesque and fearsome, have captivated the imagination of visitors and locals alike for centuries. The gargoyles were designed at the same time as the cathedral's architecture. The word gargoyle comes from the Latin term gorge and Old French gourel, meaning mouth. In addition to their functional role, gargoyles at Notre Dame Cathedral were also conceived as symbolic and decorative elements. Many of these stone creatures are thought to represent the concept of evil, with their monstrous and fearsome appearance serving to ward off negative forces and remind the faithful of their perils of sin. Their presence on the church's exterior not only enhances its visual appeal, but also contributes to the overall Gothic aesthetic, evoking a sense of mystery and otherworldliness. Gargoyles are decorative elements with a practical purpose. Their function is to protect the walls from rainwater runoff, which erodes the stone. They designate the end of gutters to drain away water from the roof. That is why they appear overhanging, leaning into the void, mainly lodged in a large flying buttress of the choir. And so what would happen is there'd be a giant thunderstorm and rain and everything happening, and then out of the mouths of the gargoyle would come all the water pouring down into the street. So you can just imagine what a fearsome sight that might have been. So on April 15th, 2019, just before 1820 in the evening, a structural fire broke out in the roof space of Notre Dame, a medieval Catholic cathedral. By the time the fire was extinguished, the cathedral's wooden spire had collapsed completely. Most of the wooden roof had been destroyed, and the cathedral's upper walls were severely damaged. Extensive damage to the interior was prevented by the vaulted stone ceiling, which largely contained the burning roof as it collapsed. Many works of art and religious relics were moved to safety, but others suffered smoke damage, and some of the exterior art was damaged and destroyed. The cathedral's altar, the 2 pipe organs, and 3 13th century rose windows suffered little to no damage. These 3 emergency workers were injured. The fire contaminated the site and nearby areas of Paris with toxic dust and lead. Notre Dame did not hold a Christmas Mass in 2019 for the first time since 1803. Investigators in 2020 believe that the fire had been started by either a cigarette or a short circuit in an electrical system. On 17th of April, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, set a 5-year deadline to restore the cathedral. By September 2021, donors had contributed over 840 million euros to the rebuilding effort. The cathedral is expected to reopen this December 2024. The cathedral stonework had been severely eroded by years of weather and pollution, and the spire had extensively rotted because of fissures in its lead sheathing that were admitting water. The roof timbers were dry and spongy and powdery with age. In 2014, the Ministry of Culture estimated needed renovations to be at 150 million euros. And in 2016, the Archdiocese of Paris launched an appeal to raise 100 million euros over the following 5 to 10 years at the time of the fire. The spire was undergoing restoration and scaffolding was being erected over the transept. Extensive attention has been given to the risk of fire to the cathedral at that time. The Paris Fire Brigade drilled regularly to prepare for an emergency there, including on-site exercises in 2018. A firefighter was posted in the cathedral each day, and fire wardens were checked the conditions of the roof 3 times daily. But that didn't help because the fire happened when nobody happened to be there, and it had smoldered for quite a while before they were actually able to go and contain it. So there we can see kind of show you what areas were really damaged. So this is another cathedral that I'd like to talk a little bit about, and that is the west facade of the Reims Cathedral. So here we see Notre Dame of Reims, meaning Our Lady of Reims, known as to the English as the Reims Cathedral. The cathedral church is thought to have been founded by the Bishop Nicasius in the early 5th century. Clovis was baptized a Christian here by Saint Remigius, the Bishop of Reims, about a century later. He was the first Frankish king to receive the sacrament. Construction of the present Reims Cathedral began in the 13th century and concluded in the 14th century. A prominent example of high Gothic architecture, it was built to replace an earlier church that was destroyed by fire in 1210. Although little damage during the French Revolution, the present cathedral saw extensive restoration in the 19th century. Since the 1905 law on the separation of church and state, the cathedral has been owned by the French state, while the Catholic Church has an agreement as exclusive users of the church. The French state pays for its restoration and for its upkeep. And there we have the roofing to kind of show you what that would look like with the rib vaulting. And there's our nave. And now we're going to look at Sainte-Chapelle. Sainte-Chapelle is a Gothic marvel. It is a beautiful church, and it is if you ever get to France, which we are going to be going to Paris in the spring of 2025 as a school trip, and this is definitely on my list to go visit. It was one of the most beautiful little chapels in all of Paris. So, unable to meet his debts, it was left to Louis the Ninth to redeem the payment and retrieve the crown in 1239. In acquiring additional relics and design the design of a shrine to contain them, he spent 2.5 times the cost of building the Sainte-Chapelle. When you enter the chapel built by Louis, you will first experience the lower chapel built for the workers and the servants. The area houses the gift shop and the oldest painted wall in Paris. It is impressive. Spend some time looking around, but the main attraction is upstairs. Go up the little stairs and prepare to be awed. Pick up a free informational card at the back of the church and tells all the history of the 1,113 stained glass windows that tell the story of the Bible. The upper sanctuary was for the king and his private guests. The focal point was the relics of Christ, including Jesus' crown of thorns that was purchased in 1239 for more than it cost to build the chapel. These relics are now housed in the Notre Dame Cathedral. Sainte-Chapelle is located right around the corner from Notre Dame, so it's really accessible. And here we can see kind of this is to kind of give you an idea of what. So these are buttresses, the dark black area. There's the rib vaulting, and all the rest, the whole thing is windows. And then this is the above the altar, the painted area above the altar. And that really shows you like how colorful all these interior churches were. This is the Amiens, the Cathedral Basilica of Our Lady of Amiens. Again, a Catholic cathedral. The cathedral is the seat of the Bishop of Amiens. It is situated on a ridge overlooking the River Somme in Amiens, the administrative capital of the Picardy of the region of France. Again, you can see the Gothic influences. There we have our light, our windows, our stained glass windows, our rose windows above each area. There's an overhead built entirely between 1220 and 1270. A very short period, considering that these cathedrals would take sometimes 100 years. They were trying to minimize the amount of stone and maximize the internal dimension in order to bring in more light. And that is the end of our presentation about Gothic cathedrals. Please make sure that you check out the section on Gothic cathedrals in the other video section of the course. And next time we're going to start to talk about a little about the early Renaissance.